Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our second online open source fintech meetup, where today I'm delighted to be joined by Jonathan Haggarty, Head of Open Banking at NatWest. We actually booked Jonathan to speak at our Edinburgh meetup back in March, which was the first event that we had to cancel because of COVID-19. But I guess one of the upsides of this situation that we find ourselves in is that we're able to share Jonathan's talk with so many more of you now that we're not bound by geographical restrictions. That being said, I'll be very happy when we can meet you all face to face once again as soon as circumstances allow. So let me tell you a bit about the meetups before we get started. The open source fintech meetup is developed in partnership between Finos and ScotLogic, usually run in London and Edinburgh, with the aim of building a healthy engineering open source community in the UK. We cover a wide variety of topics in our meetups. So if there's a particular topic or theme that you'd like us to cover, or you have an idea for a talk, please do give us your feedback at the end of this webinar, where a short survey will appear. If you'd like to ask a question, pop it into the question box and we'll take as many as we can at the end. And if you'd like a copy of today's slides, you can download these in the handout section. So without further ado, let me introduce you to today's speaker. Jonathan has been working at NatWest for the last 7 years and has spent 3 of those leading their open banking and API initiatives. Prior to that, he spent a long time chasing pixel perfection at the likes of UBS and Morgan Stanley, building everything from trading platforms to video walls. He lives in Glasgow with his wife, Nikki, who works as a horse vet, 3 young children and a large cat called Frank, and I do hope he makes an appearance. And Jonathan is a software developer at heart and builds his teams around people with a similar outlook and mindset. So over to you, Jonathan.
Thanks a lot for the intro, Claire. I'm thrilled to take part in the series, even if it is entirely online. I must admit, it does feel a wee bit like the tech equivalent of Through the Keyhole. I did spend a disproportionate amount of time figuring out if I could put some sort of Easter egg or object in the background. But thankfully, the adult in me won through, and people are going to have to settle for my youngest son's soon-to-be bedroom and some of the motivational children's posters that we've got on the wall available through Etsy. So as Claire said, I've been working at NatWest for the last 7 or 8 years roughly in a variety of roles. But the thing I'm here to talk about today is what I've been working on for roughly the last 3.5, APIs and open banking. We've only got about 30 minutes or so. We want to leave some time for questions at the end. So I'm going to use that time to try and help people understand a wee bit about what open banking means to NatWest, given that frankly means wildly different things to different people, and that in itself could probably be a 30-minute webinar. I'll talk a wee bit about where we started to try and ground people in terms of where they might be on that journey. I'll talk a wee bit about our technical evolution and where we've got to and where we're heading to. And hopefully throughout that, I can provide some hints, tips, insights that help people maybe avoid some of the pain, challenges and mistakes that we've made and come and join us on that journey as well. So just Claire sent me a rough view of where people are joining us from, and it's a really broad spectrum. So we've got a lot of people in the UK, but we've even got quite a few people joining from the US. We've even got some people joining from Europe and Africa as well. So I thought the first thing that would be valuable was really to step back a bit and to give people, I guess, the 1,000-meter view of what open banking is, where we have been, and where we are today, really, and then we can get into the how and some of the challenges around that. So put really simple, open banking is where we as a bank share APIs that other companies, software development companies and financial services can consume in order to build propositions for both our customers and ultimately their customers as well. In terms of open banking as a concept, the concept of sharing data has been around for decades, really, in various forms. So we've shared big file downloads with money management platforms. That's nightly gigs of data uploaded via FTP to random file stores. We've created features inside our customer platforms for them to download Excel spreadsheets, fill transactions, etc., for them to re-upload into other platforms. And more recently, things like screen scraping have allowed people to ultimately share their data with third-party propositions. All come with various hurdles and barriers to entry that hopefully you guys will see open banking has removed and really lowered. So the modern incarnation of open banking, from at least the NatWest perspective, really started at the end of 2016, early 2017. It would be honest for me to tell people that it started really off the back of some research that the Competition and Markets Authority did into the UK market, and basically found that they thought the general financial market could be more innovative and more competitive for everyday Joe Blogs on the street. And the thing that they really kicked off the back of that was the UK's kind of version of open banking. I think the thing that I'd like to stress is really, as we've gone on that journey, we see it much more than something that we have to do. It's something that is now really a mindset and a culture in the organisation, and a total paradigm shift for us as a bank and also as a tech organisation. Back in 2016, everything that we developed for customers was developed at the pace of NatWest. So really, our ability to get stuff into our customers' hands was predicated on how quickly we as an organisation could build features, how quickly we could listen to customers, and how we could have a bit of a bun fight about how we prioritise those things internally. Moving into 2017, we built some really simple stuff. I think almost overly simple, but it was a great test for banks and NatWest generally, just to really prove that we could actually deliver things into production for use by people that aren't ourselves. So that's APIs like, what products does the bank offer in terms of current accounts, where are ATMs, where are our branches, what are their opening hours, etc. So nothing that was particularly world changing, but a good kind of big toe into the kind of space that we were entering more generally. We moved into the rest of 2017, so the last 9 months, we introduced the concept of customer, and we had to deliver a whole heap of APIs for a UK customer base. And just to give people some clarity into NatWest as an organisation, we are a bank of brands. We have lots of different brands that serve different customer types in different locations. For the technologists, the many technologists on the line, you understand that creates a lot of complexity in terms of the underlying systems that we use to serve those customers and the teams that ultimately own those systems. But for the first delivery, we were focused on the UK, so NatWest, Royal Bank of Scotland, and Ulster Bank North. Just for clarity, those APIs were things like, what accounts have customers got, what are their balances, what are the transactions on the accounts, and really some fairly simple functionality to kick off domestic faster payments. So as we were doing that, the ecosystem was gearing up to help people use these APIs. I'll talk a wee bit about how that ecosystem's formed in a minute. But the great thing was, as we were building, people were building up interest in getting this stuff used, so that when we did come to get this stuff live on January 13th, 2018, a date very close to everyone's hearts here at NatWest, we had some instant consumption. Time marched on, 2018, 2019, we had to grow the API set. We went from just the UK brands to encompass all of our digital brands as part of some wider EU legislation. So expanding out to things like Southern Ireland, our Coutts customers, Adam & Co, and some of our international brands, etc. Again, really adding to the complexity of how we deliver these APIs. Equally, we had to add more products. So, the first implementation was restricted to a small set of products, current accounts only. But as we expanded out, we added more and more products, more and more features, etc. The thing I think that's probably important for people to understand is, as we've done that, the API paradigm generally has helped us hide that complexity for our customers, but it was by no means a simple or easy task, and took some fairly Herculean efforts inside the bank to really make that happen in a fairly short period of time. So if we look at the ecosystem, and I thought, given the kind of content of the series, it would be great to compare open banking to open source a wee bit more generally, because really they share a lot of the same principles. At the heart of open banking, the goal is shared value. Value for us as a bank, value for our customers, value for people that consume the APIs that are building propositions for our customers. And if you look at open source, I guess it needs a few things to be successful. So it has to have the concept of community, and part of the ecosystem that we brought together in the UK really brought that to life. We had people building the APIs, not just ourselves. We had people that want to consume this stuff, and sometimes those people actually overlapped. And then we had influencers in the ecosystem as well, in the form of regulators, implementation entities, and industry experts that wanted to contribute to how this really took shape. Cards on the table. It's not a truly open source model, because clearly people can't contribute to our implementation in terms of code. What they can do is contribute in terms of the standards, the types of features that we as an industry should be building, and work with us to work through those issues and really move the world forward. So if we have a wee bit of a look at our starting point, I guess the thing that a lot of people come back to is, we as a bank have APIs. We as technologists have been building APIs for years. And I think when we started, we thought we would have a fairly decent springboard, because a lot of these functions actually exist inside the bank. We've got mobile apps, we've got web-based platforms that show people data. Therefore, we must have APIs. But in truth, and being absolutely candid, when we went around the organisation, and people did say, yeah, we've got APIs, we've been building them for years. When we asked to reuse them, suddenly the kind of tone of the conversation changed a bit. People would say, well, they're private APIs, or they've only been built for our very specific use case, which to some extent I would have to debate whether those things are truly APIs. They're really byproducts of propositions that we as a bank have chosen to build. So some of the things that I've got here are really clues on your organisational maturity, and whether or not you've got the right capability in your organisation to kind of start to open up and share this sort of functionality. So have a look around. Do you have documentation, which is a great indicator of are people open to reuse? And the short answer is we had plenty. We had almost an overwhelming amount in various forms. Word, Excel, PowerPoint. People documented stuff in effectively every form you could find. We had plenty of WSDLs from the kind of 90s and noughties, when SOAP and XML was the end thing. My personal favourite was always the conference documentation you would find, that you would follow through to a point and inevitably would be slightly wrong, but you had the kind of disclaimer at the bottom, which was, please update this documentation as you go, which I thought I always have a good chuckle at. So the second thing that's probably worth having a look at is, do you have any API gateways in your organisation? And gateway again is a very nebulous term, but there are things that allow you to expose functionality from your organisation in a consistent way. And again, turns out we had a lot of products in this space. We had, everything from Apache and Nginx through to products like, IBM's Data Power, CA's Layer 7 product, you name it, we had it. And the challenge, I think, with a lot of these products was that to get access to them, you had to contact particular teams in the bank. They would be called, things like the middleware team or the gateway team. And the way that you spoke to these teams was, it felt a wee bit like praying, if I'm being honest. You create some words somewhere, you ask for some things, and then at some point they materialize in some form. Whether that was immediate in 6 months or came in ways you never wanted or intended is slightly secondary. But it was just really difficult to get on people's radars and backlogs and actually get stuff built. And then the third thing that's worth having a look at is, what's your security setup in the bank? Are you geared up to really create new API connectivity out to the market? Again, we were actually slightly further ahead of the curve in this space. We had done a lot with modern security products in recent years. So although we hadn't maybe embraced some of the API concepts in those products, like OAuth, mutual authentication, they were there and ready for us to build on top of. So all in all, the answer to, do we have APIs was really not really. We had kind of bags full of random parts. To some extent, it felt a wee bit like a kind of episode of Scrap Heap Challenge. You turned up and you had all this stuff. Crack on and figure out how you can hang together some APIs that we can put to market. And I'll apologise to our non-UK listeners if that's not a program at your way. So this is pretty much a picture of me, I think probably around June 2017. Quite frankly, I'm not actually entirely convinced that it looks much different today. Unless I feel like I'm constantly falling forwards, I tend to feel a wee bit uneasy about the progress we're making. And I think, to be honest with you, Claire mentioned that I've got 3 very young children, 4-year-old, a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. So I've somewhat lost the ability to differentiate chaos from normality, which, by the way, is an incredible skill to have when you're having to build in big corporate organisations. You're trying to work your way through some of the chaos that exists internally. So we touched on some of these points as we talked about some of the things that we look for inside an organisation. When we started to look at the more complex APIs, we realised that we were firmly in the realm of opinion, which is, an okay place to be in some scenarios when you have the time and mental thinking space to debate and figure out how to move, a wide spectrum of views into clarity. But we had, just over 6 months, which in some companies, if you work in smaller companies, that's probably a long time. When you work in big banks, that feels like a fairly insignificant amount of time, or at least it did back then. As we were kind of embarking on this journey, we really realised that we didn't just have a technical issue to face into here. It was one of culture as well. People fundamentally couldn't get their heads around the fact that we were going to be exposing stuff to a market that we weren't in control of. We weren't in control of what people would build on top of it, and to some extent we weren't really in control of how people would use it. So it took a lot of convincing and cajoling people over the course of a number of months and even years to try and change that culture. And as I say, we had to build across a spectrum of systems, a spectrum of teams, a spectrum of product sets, which just really adds to the complexity of trying to get this stuff delivered in any reasonable period of time. And the other thing that's worth mentioning actually is it wasn't only a product and system exposure problem, it was actually there's a lot of modern standards here that we have to build just to make these APIs usable. You know, the concept of customer consent, the concept of customer management portals, the concept of staff management portals, etc. These weren't small undertakings or things that we just had lying around. So I guess a kind of brief view into how we went about implementing this at least in the first iteration. We put some common standards in that everyone could benefit from. There are things like security, standing up an endpoint, threat protection, understanding who customers and consumers are. We had to put a lot of microservices live to really abstract and orchestrate the multiple underlying systems that we have in the bank, and even the multiple customer bases that we have. You know, our APIs are system and customer agnostic, so you can use them to speak to all sorts, and managing that complexity is really quite difficult. It's probably also worth saying that our first implementation, we really had to put our nose to the grinder to some extent. A lot of the products we used, they were products that we had access to in the bank. We couldn't afford really to go to market and use bleeding edge, just in the timescales that we had. And change isn't always easy, right? We had to really, put a lot of effort into getting this stuff over the line. So this is the first iteration, and I'll hopefully share with you guys how we've evolved on that. So first kind of tip, I guess, and this has got a bit of 2 points really. So I heard this quote back when I was training for some marathons. Not that you would know now, hoping to lose a double chin soon. And it was from a running podcast who were speaking about a mental health running group. And the mantra of the running group was really that, you should be able to run and talk, because exercise is a great way of getting people to release endorphins, which is a great way to get people to speak to one another. So the point was that people in the group shouldn't feel compelled to keep up with everyone. And what I would say is that if you're going to implement massive change in a big corporate organization, you need pace setters. You need people that are going to break organizational norms. They're going to push technical boundaries to get stuff done, but they're going to do that in a way that doesn't kind of burn the organization down or burn bridges. I think the important thing to recognize is that actually you have to use those people to reach into the bank, to bring people on that journey with you, and really to stay in their horizon so that they can keep pace with you. As I tell people, if you're out running and you sprint to the finish, and it so happens your friend behind you's got the car keys, you're not going to get in the car any quicker. Therefore, you've really got to balance your mindset and figure out what's important and how to get people on that journey. We've evolved a lot in those 3 years. So we've really gone, as I say, from depending on these skill sets to bringing in new products to the bank to try and remove some of the pain and manual effort for building these APIs. So the top, probably fairly familiar to some people, were all the things that we used to do. And each of those things represented a separate handoff, right? You had to speak to the DNS team or the firewall team, or you had to speak to the security team to get certificates provisioned, or the kind of number of handoffs was really large, and our ability to automate that stuff was really small. So the timeline was naturally quite long. What we did was we, post the initial delivery in 2018, we started to look at some modern products. So we brought in a product called Google Apogee, and with that, we've really started to re-empower our developers, to give them the ability to automate all the things that you see on top, such that we can start to get new things live in a matter of days and weeks, rather than a matter of months. And that's really been key for taking us to the next level. So not just implementing the things that are part of the mandatory specs, but starting to implement things that we think start to push the boundaries and people want. So some of the technical artifacts that I guess we've built as part of that journey, and I've been a bit deliberately wordy on the slides so that people can take it away and reflect on it, are things like a scalable and an automatable API gateway. As I say, it just makes it much easier to get endpoints live and connect into various parts of your organization if that stuff is simple and the barrier to use is as low as it can possibly be. From a reuse perspective, and for those that know open banking, a fundamental part of it is the concept of consent. Actually, there's lots of use cases throughout the bank where we want to use those APIs and ask for consent in slightly different ways. So, for example, if they're a bank customer, asking our own customers for consent to access their data when we, have onboarded them and they've taken an account out with us, seems a bit unusual. Somewhere for community to be centered around. So we have an API developer portal, bankofapis.com. That's somewhere where we allow people to federate content into. And as time goes on, we're looking to add more and more features to try and drive community and drive developers both inside the organization and outside the organization there. And really important, I think, is when you have an API channel, when someone's consuming your API, and it's something that we spoke about when I was at UBS, is you've got to have the concept of wallet share. So if that consumer can use one API, actually make sure that they can see everything else you've built and make sure that it's possible for those people to use those things in a simple and quick way. So second kind of, I guess, tidbit is something that I actually learned back in the day when I was at Morgan Stanley during my time as an intern, which is really around how you implement change in mass organizations, right? It's you can't wait for the machine to catch up with you. You've got to cut through some of the organizational junk. And 5 minutes elapsed on a phone is just an infinitely valuable use of your time versus hours of emails and IMs and tickets, etc. And it's not a direct quote, but the CIO back then, I think he might still be today, actually, John Sachs, used to come and speak to interns, speak to industrial placements and grads. And his basic view was that if you ever need to know something or you want to understand something better, then the default should be pick up the phone and speak to someone. So where are we now? We've really hit the sweet spot, I think. The strap line here is that innovation happens at the speed of the ecosystem. So we're no longer dependent on RBS being a monopoly of ideas or skills. The ecosystem itself is building great propositions for our customers, which we're really happy that our customers can embrace and use and make their life easier. We've implemented that across, I've listed some of our brands here and just frankly cherry picked a few of the third parties that are starting to really use open banking and Anger for various things. Put that into some stats for people in the room. If you're wondering about what's the real use, we have about 60 APIs live per brand, and we did have 10 brands live, but Bo departed us and has merged with Metal, which totals hundreds of different endpoints when you take into account versions and brands. We've had almost 1 million customers use propositions that use these APIs. That translates to about 80 million plus API hits a month. We have a great relationship with the ecosystem, and the TPPs regularly both raise tickets with us to discuss problems, feature requests, you name it. About 120 third parties registered with NatWest Group as a whole, building a variety of things for our customers. And as I say, nine brands live across the estate. The last couple of slides, then we'll take some questions, so tee those up if you want. One thing that we learned early on was really to inspect what we expect. So when we are building APIs, we've done things like built our own third party that's hosted on AWS. And when we put stuff live, we always add that functionality to, we call it our heartbeat, and really try and test this stuff in production for real. People talk about eating your own dog food. I've always found that a wee bit weird because I don't know why you'd eat dog food, quite frankly. But be your own worst enemy. Test and use the things that you provide. We've also got plans to start doing things like simulating fake load in production to try and use the crystal ball to see issues before we have issues. And when you interact with third parties and companies outside of your own, it's great to have some common ground to use and explore and talk about. And then finally, where is it taking us as an organisation? And I think to put it into context, in 2016, we spent a large amount of time convincing people that we should spin up bits of work. We spent an even larger amount of time doing the plumbing to get the basics right. And by that, I literally mean getting balances, transactions, accounts that people have got. We spent a fraction of the time on the actual customer idea that we were trying to prove. And then because that build process created a lot of artifacts, we spent a fair amount of time trying to ship those bespoke bits and pieces towards a production environment. And if you compare and contrast that to 2020, we spend almost no time doing the convincing and plumbing part because it exists through the APIs. We get to spend an awful lot of time on actually iterating on the customer idea and what's the value that we're trying to realise. And again, because this stuff is production in production already, it's live, it's tested, etc. Actually, the shipping is really just the shipping of the customer idea and not everything that surrounds the idea. And that is pretty much it. I think it's a bit of a whirlwind tour. I hope my Glaswegian accent hasn't been too hard to keep pace with. I'm sure Claire will share the recording and people can go back through and play it at 50% speed. But I hope people find that interesting and they picked up some useful things that might help them on their journey.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was a really fascinating insight into the journey that you and the team have been on over the last few years. And if they can understand my Yorkshire drawl, then they can understand your Glaswegian accent, I'm sure. Just a quick heads up about a couple of webinars that are coming up from ScottLogic and Finos. So there's one next week that you might be interested in. There's Mark Joe's technical principal at ScottLogic doing a webinar on building desktop applications with OpenFin, and there's a link on there if you want to register. And then there's another one there that's coming up from Finos Data Hub, enabling synthetic data generation in financial services. So just give them a follow on LinkedIn for more notifications about those. So I can see some questions coming in. We've got about another 10 minutes, so do get your questions in if you've got any for Johnny. So let's have a look at what's come in so far. So I've got one here saying, hi, Alex Bunch from Scottish Government here, likely to start using the NatWest RBS API in the coming 12 months. You mentioned value for the brand/bank. How does the value you are hoping to get from corporate customers materialize through the API?
So I guess there's a few different elements to that. So the first is, the one that I alluded to. I think we as a bank realise that we don't have a monopoly on great ideas or great features that we want to build for customers. So from a pure customer perspective, we're delighted that other innovative players in the market can bring things to life for those customers. Equally, as customers use the APIs that we provide, we want to deepen their relationship with the bank. We want them to do, make more payments through us. We want them to depend on us as a partner that they can really get what they want done. And the only way to do that is really to open up this connectivity and not be shy in doing that. Going forward from a commercial perspective, we do have ambitions and things in flight where we're starting to work with commercial partners to provide APIs that are over and above some of the open banking ones. I use open banking as a mandate as opposed to a paradigm, i.e. things that they would be willing to partner on to add customer value. And as part of that process, we as a bank are exploring how we can get value from that as well, whether it be through selling more products to people or charging people for APIs. We're quite early in that journey.
Great stuff. So another one for you here. What one thing would you have done differently if you were on this journey again?
Good one. Do you know what? I really struggle to say I'm going to give you a really guff answer here, but I would really struggle to do much differently. I've worked on some fairly intense projects in my career, and I'm sure there's a few people on the line that have worked on things like Morgan Stanley Matrix and UBS Neo and the likes. We had a great time building this stuff. We had a few late nights, the odd bottle of wine in the office after dark to get things over the line. I was to change one thing. Wow. Maybe to get further into the organisation and bring people further along the journey. I think as part of the initial implementation, we were so mono-focused on meeting the dates. One of the things that we perhaps missed was actually when we get to delivering this stuff, there's not only a lot of value for propositions that the ecosystem are providing, but there's massive value for the bank to build on this stuff. And I think in hindsight, actually gearing more propositions up inside the bank would have allowed us to be 3 or 6 months in front of perhaps where we are now. But as I say, we've had a great bunch of engineers across the bank lean in to help us deliver this, and to be honest with you, I wouldn't change that for the world.
Right, here's another one for you, Jonathan. So what was the biggest challenge you faced when integrating the bank's core banking systems with the externally exposed APIs?
It's a good question. So there were a few challenges. So just to rhyme a few off, I guess. One was the way that the bank's core systems work is they are highly tuned, and people tend to understand the peaks and troughs of their use, which allows people to do capacity planning. And actually, when you look at the API market, you can do API usage with customer present, or you can do API usage without customer present. So trying to help people in those teams understand that we're moving from a model where it's our mobile app or our e-banking platform or our Bankline platform that's going to ultimately be hitting these APIs, to one where actually we don't really know who's going to be hitting these APIs, and what we do know will be not much when they do, quite frankly. We aren't privy to what people build with this stuff. We do know who connects to us and how often they use this stuff, etc. But we aren't part of proposition development, and that was a really difficult conversation just to bend people's heads rounds. I think equally, as I say, just being really candid, we are a big organisation that has a lot of old mainframe type systems, and we've got a variety of ways that we've connected into those systems over the years. And one thing that we had to really toss a coin on more than once was, do we push through with strategic and connect to these systems using some ESP technology that we have in the bank, or would it be quicker to go direct to say kicks and mainframe to get some of this information? I think, impressively, we managed to stay true to what we wanted to do and resolve some technical debt on that journey. And equally, I think we we made the adult decision in the room when really time time wasn't on our side in order to do that. So we accumulated a wee bit of technical debt in that space, but you know, we're always recovering that and trying to find ways to draw down on it.
Great. Here's another one for you. Are you totally using layer 7 for your APIs? Do you have any plan to use open source technologies like K8, Istio, Linkerd, etc.?
Yeah, we've got a mix. In the bank, we use some CA layer 7 product. I presume in the API management platform to some extent. As I say, we're in the process of rolling out Google Apigee as part of our kind of microservice estate in terms of you know, Kubernetes and Istio, etc. We're in the middle of moving to some internal hybrid cloud capability. That's really based around Pivotal Cloud Foundry, Spring Boot, etc. So really the main focus is on moving to that. But I think, you know, as part of that evolution, we'll start to naturally look at some of those technologies that have been mentioned.
Great stuff. So another one here. What challenges have you faced doing it in the cloud?
More organisational challenges than anything, to be honest with you. I mean, I think anyone that works in either a bank or a big corporate would recognise that you know, cloud is a word that strikes different emotions in different people depending on what part of the bank you're in. You know, there's hesitance and reticence to use this stuff and continue to depend on the status quo, if you want. You know, I think it's up to great technologists and great engineers to push that status quo and take people on a journey towards where we ultimately need to be. And I think, you know, we would definitely recognise we want to be using both cloud and cloud-like capability. Yeah, I mean, it's just really about getting people on that journey with us, and frankly, not always using things that are way at the really sharp bleeding edge side of the technology spectrum, using and recognising that it can sometimes be easier in our organisation to you know, pick the things that we know will both move us forward, but also we won't spend months or longer in religious debates about whether or not they're the right thing to do. So it's, you know, finding that sweet spot and taking people on the journey towards cloud that's important.
Right, I think we've got time for one more question. So it's thanks for the fantastic insights, Johnny. In terms of staying ahead of the curve and bringing teams on that journey, how do you ensure everyone has the time and motivation to continually learn?
Great question, actually. And you know, I mean, RBS, or sorry, NatWest, even I'm still using old lingo. NatWest as an organisation, it has a few core values and principles. And one of the things that our CEO has introduced is the concept of making sure that we are a learning organisation. And one thing that comes through, not only just in technology, but across the organisation as a whole, is that, you know, we expect people to take time out of their days, weeks, months, frankly, to come to things like this, for example, to gain some insight. You know, we're actively pushing ways to move us closer towards being a learning organisation, one that reflects and one that tries to be open and be open to new concepts, new technologies, etc. So it's really that's a culture thing, you know. I'm sure some of my team will be on this call, and I can't stress enough that I will give them the right air cover for them to take time out of delivering pure technical outcomes to learn a new skill, to go on a course, and to do that on a frankly regular basis and embed that into their own routines, and start to make habits around learning new things.
Thanks for that. And we're bang on time to finish. So all that's left for me to say is thank you so much for that, Jonathan. Really appreciate it. We got there in the end, even though we're 3 months beyond the originally scheduled date for this. So much appreciated.
I'm still going to hold you. I'm still going to hold you to the beers.
The beer and pizza, I know that's what we're missing, isn't it? We definitely owe you one. So, and thank you to everybody for joining us. And we hope we see you on the next webinars. And bye for now.
Fabulous. Bye, everyone.